Have, have you ever heard the story of Aaron Brockovich? In case you haven't, let me share it with you. It is a true story, and it is also a good movie I recommend. Aaron Brockovich was a temp hire at an attorney's office in some West Coast city. She was put in charge of filing papers or something. And while working on the filing, she came across a file that said it needed more information. So she took it upon herself to find that information. And the information she needed was located in a small, out-of-the-way town hours from the city, so she drove out there and took something like 2 weeks collecting all the information that the file requested. In the process, she uncovered a major class action lawsuit waiting to happen against a corporation whose toxic dump had poisoned the water of a small town and made everyone sick. Now, there was a little hubbub at the firm when she returned to where she worked because no one knew where she had gone. But she went into the head honcho's office and made her case, telling him how he'd been ignoring these real people and how big of a problem they were facing. And once he was put in his place, the head honcho goes with her to see the issue and gives her full rein to keep building a case. Eventually, they have all the hard evidence they need, but they are a small firm, and they need the assistance of a large firm to take on a case this big. So the large firm comes in and says, "We've got it from here. Thank you for all your hard work. We don't need you anymore." Aaron is irate and asks them how they're going to learn the names and the stories of all these people in the weeks before the trial. They balk at this and claim no one could possibly remember the information of over 600 plaintiffs. You can't possibly have all their phone numbers memorized. To which Aaron challenges them and says, "Ask. Pick a name and ask." And then recites the answer to every challenge by heart, knowing their phone numbers and detailed stories of every person in the lawsuit. Aaron was a nobody. But she did more as a nobody than all those mighty attorneys could ever imagine. I wrestle with the story of the widow's mite, as it's classically called. Not because it's not like the story of the young rich man. The young rich man that we heard a few weeks ago desires to fulfill the law, and so Jesus asks him to give away everything. Trade your earthly treasures, Jesus says, for treasures in heaven. But as you know, this is just too hard. Jesus invites us to do the impossible, and it's been a month now since we heard that story, and not one of you has taken up Jesus' challenge. Not one of you has given away even half of your wealth. I haven't either. Did this widow do what we couldn't? I don't think so, actually. Why do I say that? Partly because Jesus does not invite us to go and do likewise. He doesn't praise her faith. He doesn't say she's done a good thing. He doesn't say, like he says with Zacchaeus, "Here is a true child of Abraham." Now wait, Pastor, you might be saying, I specifically remember Jesus praising this widow and saying that she did a good thing. So let's hear this story again and think about that for a moment. Let me give you some context. 2 days ago, Jesus entered Jerusalem in the Palm Sunday parade. Yesterday, he walked in the temple, and the only thing he said is, "This place is a den of robbers." Now he has just railed against the scribes for devouring widows' homes. And then what happens? Many rich people put large sums of money in the treasury. John, who lives in an $800,000 home, puts in $2,500. Joe, who makes $125,000 a year, puts in $2,000. Jill, who has a $60,000 Tesla, puts in $1,000. Jerry, who owns a boat and a lake house, puts in $500. That's all well and good. Jesus says nothing about all that. Then this widow comes up. Jesus knows she's destitute, not just because of the tattered clothes. He can see in her face how little she's eaten lately. He notices the locks of hair sticking out of her hijab and can tell that she hasn't had a real bath in a month. He sees her sandals are missing part of their soles and are held on by frayed strings, broken in ways that no one who's pretending would ever willingly endure. No one else seems to notice her, but Jesus sees this widow and watches as she puts 2 half-cents into the treasury. Her gift is worthless. And yet Jesus turns and says to his disciples, "You see that widow? Do you really see her? Her gift was mightier than all the others combined. For everyone else gave out of their abundance, but she, in her poverty, gave everything she had." Now, do you think the point of this story is to give all you have? Be like this mighty widow. Give everything you have as well. If that was the point, we already had that in the story of the rich man, and none of you did anything. If that was the point, preaching today would just be pointless. The widow's might isn't that she gave everything. Erin Brockovich's might isn't that she cared about a people in a small town. Her might was that as a lowly temp, she taught these great attorneys what justice actually means. The widow's might was that her offering put the whole temple to shame. Because with all those rich people swarming about, 2 half-cents amounted to everything she had. Her gift puts their smug generosity to shame because not one of them had enough to give her. In the very next verse, as Jesus leaves the temple, he says to his disciples, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be torn down." This widow proved that the system is broken, and her gift, Jesus said, would bring the whole structure toppling down. We have a similar story in our Lutheran faith tradition. I know that we like to say that the Reformation started when Luther pounded those 95 theses to the door, but that's not actually true. The Reformation began 7 years earlier, when Luther visited Rome. Groundwork for St. Peter's Basilica had been laid 4 years prior to Luther's visit, and the church was desperate for money to fund the construction. And in their greed, thousands of widows were giving their last 2 cents to build a mansion for God, who didn't need it. It was the might of all those widows that shamed Luther and showed him that the system was broken. They moved his heart to tear the broken parts of that system out, so that the gospel could finally be heard. This is the widow's story. Her might isn't that she gave all, but that her gift put all to shame. It's like the story of little David, which really isn't an underdog story like you might think it is. We all think of this story as the story of David versus Goliath, little person versus big person, when the story is really about the boy who dared to stand up when no one else would. The entire Israelite army was cowering in fear, from the lowest soldier all the way right up to the mighty king. For days now, Goliath has been coming out, taunting them, laughing at those weaklings. And it's not like 15-year-old David was a better warrior than anyone else, or that he had some unique skill with the sling, knew how to throw a rock the way no one else did. There were surely many slingers in Saul's army because it was the bow and arrow of the day. David's might shamed them all. Not because he was better than any of them, but because his faith showed how little they believed. Or it was like the day in 1965 that we call Bloody Sunday in America, when people across the country watched on TV as black nobodies, subhumans in the eyes of many at that time in our country's history, who were braver than the white ministers who was written to Dr. King 2 years earlier while he was in the Birmingham jail and said, "Why can't you just stop and wait?" It continued as little black children marched for the rights to be educated. And the might of these infants shamed an entire country until we finally decided to tear down Jim Crow and pass real civil rights reforms. Speaking of children, innocent children shame me all the time. A child will jump to be someone's friend faster than I ever would. A child will share long before I even realize someone's in need. Yes, I know children can be selfish and throw temper tantrums just as fast, but the shortfalls don't surprise me. I remember being a brat, but I'm an adult now. I've been a Christian all my life. Grace should be second nature. It should be so natural. So when a little child, when their love far surpasses the great love that I ought to possess, I feel like nothing beside their might. Jesus said, "Truly, I'm telling you, unless you change and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Because whoever becomes welcome, whoever becomes humble like this child, they will be the greatest in God's kingdom." And I think he meant something like this. Today is the anniversary of Kristallnacht. Do you all know that holiday? The night of broken glass. The pogrom initiated by the arrogant Hitler Youth and Nazi soldiers that began the Holocaust. I was watching a poignant video yesterday about this event. And this young man in the video said when he learned about World War II and what the Nazis did in school, he was always told about the Christians who resisted. He read The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom, a Christian who hid Jews in her attic. He learned about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, as I told you last week, one of my favorite saints. You know what this young man wasn't taught? That Hitler and the Nazi Party had the overwhelming support of the Protestant church in Germany, and that the Catholic Church was the first group to sign an international treaty with Hitler in 1933. Ten Boom and Bonhoeffer, on the other hand, were ostracized and abandoned by the church as false Christians. But yet again, it was the mighty faith of a child and a 20-something pastor. Let me say this again, because I'm 40 and people still think I'm young for a pastor. Bonhoeffer was 27 in 1933, and he led the small confessing church to oppose the great religious leaders of his day. The might of this child and this pastor put the world to shame as we waited until it was too late for millions before we finally acted. I wonder about the church today. I know that this election, there's emotions all over the place in this election. And there was the last one, there was the one before that too. And we are going to do like we do with every president, like we did during Trump's first term. We are going to pray for President Trump. We are going to ask God to bring about God's will through our new president. But regardless of our national leader, we are also called to remain faithful to Christ. And as Christians, we also call out our leaders, no matter the party, because none of them live up to the gospel we embrace. There were things I didn't like about what Biden did. There was things I didn't like about what Obama did. There were things I didn't like about what Bush did, based on my faith. And we speak up when our faith stands against their policies. And our faith today has a lot to say about foreigners. Every week we gather in worship as part of our Sabbath rest. And central to the Sabbath commandment is a remembrance of what it was like to be oppressed. As we celebrate our freedom from Egypt's slavery, God says to us, when an alien resides with you in your land, you shall not oppress the alien. The alien who resides with you shall be to you as a citizen among you. You shall love the alien as yourself, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. We uplift the Good Samaritan as so central to the gospel that it has become the epitome of loving your neighbor worldwide. Except we forget that the Samaritan was a foreigner who was so repulsive to the lawyer who asked the question that the lawyer couldn't even speak his name. Jesus asked, which one was a neighbor? And the lawyer replied, the one who showed mercy. To which Jesus replies, go and do the same. Show mercy to foreigners, like this foreigner showed mercy to you. Regardless of how any immigrant got here, or what benefits or burdens they bring to our nation, whether they have a home or a child who's a citizen or can't find work if they came here legally or illegally, or are a billionaire who violated his student visa, they are our neighbor. Period. And the cross calls us to love our neighbor with grace and mercy as wide as God's heart. And the largest mass deportation in American history will not be that. So let me warn you about an insignificant person who, if we're not careful, will have the might to put our whole nation to shame. This person will likely be someone from Worthington, Minnesota, or maybe Springfield, Ohio. Ironically, they might end up being a Puerto Rican from the Bronx, or they'll be a Muslim from Dearborn, Michigan. Maybe it'll be a Hispanic day laborer. It should have been ELCA Pastor Betty Rendon down in Racine in 2019, but it will be someone like her. Because when this happens, there will be someone who, if not right away, in the future, like we think back to Ten Boom today, in the future will be remembered as the mighty immigrant who shamed the church and the nation that claims to be a city on the hill as they were swept away in the huddled masses whom later Lady Liberty kicked off her island. At the beginning, I mentioned Erin Brockovich and how she helps me understand the widow's mite. There's a part of what she did that I haven't mentioned, because she didn't simply expose how these lawyers to how shallow they had become, like I said. She also called out of them to become greater than they thought they could be, especially her boss. She showed her boss that justice could have a heart. And so there's one last story I want to share with you to help you understand the might that this widow has. It's the story of an indigenous man in a rural town in an occupied nation. Like Aaron, he started discovering communities of people that were being poisoned by the water that they were drinking. And he poured out his heart and soul to befriend them, to care for them, to show them love. He worked hard to replace those poisoned wells with living water. And just like the corporation did with Aaron, those who had poisoned the wells resisted this man's work. But unlike Aaron, he wasn't up against just some corporation. The poison he had exposed was created by the leaders of the nation. And so they arrested him. They sentenced him to death and had him executed. But it was already too late. He had shown people that they don't need to drink this type of poison. He had given them a source of living water that could not be tainted. And not only that, he did what no one else expected. He recognized that those who had been poisoning the water had poisoned themselves. And with 3 little words, he offered them healing as well, praying, "Father, forgive them." And in that moment, Christ's might became so powerful that, as the author of the Hebrews said that we heard today, we will never again need another act of love to heal our hearts or save our souls. As Christ died on the cross, he not only exposed how small our love had become, but also showed us that love could be greater than we had ever imagined. Christ showed us what it truly means to be a child of God. And now, as children of the resurrection, Jesus has made our love just as mighty. On the cross, we are now a redeemed people, and the love of Christ has set us free. Amen.
Thank you for joining us. Be sure to like if you heard good news and subscribe to stay up to date on the latest message. Peace be with you.